Hello, friends, and welcome to Season 7 of the Future Ready Librarians podcast series, Leading from the Library. This is a podcast for all librarians wherever you are in your journey. It is filled with amazing guests, important topics, and engaging conversations that will inspire, engage, and support all of us as future ready librarians. I am your host, Shannon McClintock Miller. I am the district teacher librarian at Van Meter Community School in Van Meter, Iowa, and serve as the Future Ready Librarians Leader. I have the pleasure of working within my library and school community and also with others around the country and world through Future Ready Librarian events, conferences, consulting, writing, and more. I am honored to bring these voices and the work of others to our podcast and to all of you. Okay, everyone. Well, you are in for a treat today because I am going to welcome my friend Tim to the show. And when Tim and I talked about what he wanted to discuss today, the title of the podcast just caught my attention. And I was telling him before we got on that I was excited all day long at school to get home so I could record this with him. And the topic that we're going to talk about today is teaching media literacy in a post-truth AI world using graphic novels. So things that we all think about as librarians and as teachers. And I can't wait to hear what Tim has to share with us. But the first thing we're going to do is just hear a little bit about you, Tim. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shannon. It's great to be here. So my name is Tim Jones, and I am an elementary school librarian, but I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. The last 10 years, I have been a librarian at the high school level, and this is my 17th year in school libraries. I've been in public schools and private schools. I've done pre-K up through high school, so I've seen a lot. So I'm also a business owner as well, so I have a lot to keep myself busy, but that's kind of me. I'm just a Kentucky school librarian.
Love it. I can't wait to hear more. And I think that as we just start, that title, it says so much. And two things, of course, media literacy, something that we all think about. AI is something that we're all, asking, like, what does that mean? And also the graphic novels. And I can't wait to see how you bridge the two together and hear about that. And so we're just going to start this is a topic that you have been presenting at conferences. I'm sure you're going to talk about it at AASL coming up. And I can't wait for you just to share with us what that means for these two topics to work together.
Yeah, the topic almost feels like I reached into a hat and I just put out like lots of different words and I put them together into a title because there's a lot in there that kind of dig around in. So I'm going to be discussing graphic novels. I'm going to be discussing AI. I'm going to be discussing media literacy. And so back in 2017, when I first presented at AASL, when it was in Louisville, Kentucky, where I live, I presented on just media literacy in a post-truth world, which back then post-truth world was kind of a new kind of word that was being thrown out there. What does truth mean? What does the post-truth mean? But I also did a presentation on graphic novels and like answering questions about just graphic novels in general. And I hadn't really put those two things together yet. But I kind of like to present on graphic novels because it seemed fun, whereas media literacy felt like really just heavy and like kind of depressing. So graphic novels was like my play thing to kind of have fun and, talk about. And then I just kept on presenting on those topics with media literacy and diverse stories. And graphic novels, and just pulling in lots of different topics in with those two different topics. And then in the last couple of years, I started to see like just how much media literacy can be taught through graphic novels. I wrote an article for Book List about last summer that came out on this generally around the same topic. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is about that synthesis of those two topics. So media literacy, how does misinformation, disinformation spread today? So I just want to give a kind of a basic refresher on that. So we see in social media a lot of memes. We see just like lots of just comments and discourse. We see lots of, back in 2017, the word deepfake was like kind of a new thing, and now like we see it everywhere, and we see AI creating deepfakes. So there's a lot of out of context content. We see influencers and public figures spreading misinformation, disinformation. They spread a lot of good things too, but you see a lot of misinformation that way. And then just generally, just broadcast media, there's misinformation, sometimes disingenuous and sometimes on accident. And so those are the ways that misinformation and disinformation gets spread today. And we're going into a busy election cycle. I mean, every 4 years it's really crazy busy, but especially with AI, there's room for even more disingenuous actors out there putting things out there. And Mike Caulfield, who's a developer of the SIFT method for evaluating information, and he's an expert on misinformation research. He's already sounded the alarms on election 2024. So it's a really important topic generally. And so I want to talk a little about why graphic novels can work to kind of dispel some of this misinformation and to kind of, I mean, there's no way that we can be totally immunized to misinformation because our brains are wired to believe misinformation. But while there's no one size fits all way for teaching media literacy, I found that the graphic novel medium itself has this versatility. It's a magical versatility to work across the curriculum. And there are lots of ways to teach skills, including media literacy with comics. So I'm going to kind of delve right into it. Multimodality is a word that I use a lot because that's media for you. Media is full of like just lots of different types of multiple literacies. There's textual and visual and spatial. There's lots of things going on, whether it's a podcast like the one you're listening to, or it's TV or film or memes like I mentioned. That's our current media landscape. And that's why I think the graphic novel is the perfect medium for fostering media literacy skills, because just like when you're watching the news, you see people in boxes on your screen. Same thing, you see that same thing in graphic novels. You have panels and frames where you have characters who are in the frame, and the creator of the graphic novel is deciding like what to show you and what not to show you. So you'll see zooms, you'll see close-ups, you'll see pans, you'll see people who are not shown in the frame, just like you would in media coverage. And so but the difference is that like when the news is coming at you, when a TikTok video is coming at you, it's really fast. But with a graphic novel, it kind of slows it down, and so you're kind of seeing it at its own pace, or the student or the reader, whoever is reading the graphic novel, is able to like go at their own pace. And so again, like, social media, film, TV, video games, text messages, websites, infographics, these are all kinds of media out there that like we're constantly inundated with, that we need a lot of help with, because I mean, I fall for, even though like I've been presenting on media literacy for a while, I think everybody falls for misinformation that's out there. And I think AI is especially troubling because it's developing so fast. AI has been with us, for a little bit, but like it's especially moving fast now. Recently, Google tested an AI tool that helps write news articles, which I'm sure Google finds like that can be helpful for us, like that we can write things a lot quicker. But that's a large language model, and they are just kind of learning how to write things based on like what is already out there, what they're scraping. And so when they're scraping from sources that, for example, tend to be largely whitewashed, that have a specific perspective, and it doesn't include other perspectives in there. News can become even more whitewashed in terms of the perspectives that are out there. So like that's something that can be troubling, in addition to the fact that, like, okay, now we have people who are being cut from their jobs, like actual journalists. So I mean, there's lots of different issues that you can get into here with it. So going kind of back to graphic novels again, like the panels that your Jean Lewin Yang talked about how in a TED talk was talking about how graphic novels have like this permanence to them. As you're turning the page, you can kind of fast forward and rewind and pause all at once really quickly, and it's just very student paced. So he said it was like I was giving them a remote control over the information. And of course, if you're not familiar with Jean Lewin Yang, you need to be. He's written Boxers and Saints. Of course, he's very familiar to a lot of us for writing American-Born Chinese and many others. He taught math for a number of years and business, and he tried to do like a video lectures of some of his content, and the kids liked the videos, but then they weren't working as well for him as he would have liked. So he just started writing these comics, and those turned out really well, and the kids really loved the comics. And what he realizes that it helps slow the information down for them, and so they grasp the content a lot quicker. And so people will sometimes give comics and graphic novels a bad name and say, well, that's not real reading and it's not real learning. But like, here's somebody who actually was in the classroom, not only a graphic novel author now that we know and love, but in the classroom, he learned firsthand that like comics can actually help with learning, because visuals help us to remember, visuals help us to see. And so there's so many different benefits to graphic novels, and there's lots of benefits to drawing as well. So today, I mean, I'm talking a little bit about graphic novels and just the like reading itself, but also drawing is a big part of like what I talk about, which is because drawing has so many benefits to it. There's a lot of studies that show that it helps with information processing. A lot of studies that show that memory recall is helped through just the act of drawing itself. And so you pull all those ideas together, and that's why I'm so excited about using graphic novels and drawing for learning about media literacy and figuring out like, oh, this might have a disingenuous bad actor creating this content. And I think students, because students are drawn to graphic novels, they're drawn to drawing. That's a really important tool to have in our toolbox for teaching some of those concepts.
Yeah.
So I just moved to elementary. And so I haven't done a whole lot at the elementary level at my current school. But so we do library cards. And so on one side is their barcode for them to do self-checkout. On the other side is for them to kind of do something fun. And so I decided to have them draw their own comic about being in the library, because I wanted to kind of introduce some of these concepts to them. And so because not all students know all the words, especially elementary students, but even high school students don't know words like frame and some of these other graphic novel vocabulary words. So this was kind of my introductory lesson for them. And so kids they still know who Garfield is, and so I introduced this lesson to them through Garfield because confession, I don't really love Garfield. I find Garfield to be kind of boring. I'm just like, it's just that same 3 or 4 jokes over and over, but kids love Garfield, and so I decided to run with that. So I showed them a typical Garfield comic, and then I showed them 2 or 3 examples of Garfield minus Garfield, which was a kind of a web comic that came out, I want to say 15 or so years ago. I can't remember exactly the datage of it, but basically somebody came up with Garfield, Mine Against Garfield, where they took Garfield comics and then they erased Garfield from the comics, and people loved it. It kind of went viral, and eventually Jim Davis, Garfield's own creator, caught wind of it and decided they would actually publish some of these comics side by side, where you would see like what a comic looks like with Garfield and John Arbuckle talking, and then what it would look like with just John Arbuckle by himself being kind of depressed, basically, and how the entire tone and the entire perspective and just the entire message changes when you remove somebody's perspective from it. And the same thing happens in media when we remove somebody's important story from a story being told. And so, I set that up for the kids, but by being like, what happens when can you actually take Garfield out of his own story and actually it makes sense? And they're like, that doesn't make sense. How can you have Garfield without Garfield? But like the comics do kind of make a certain kind of sense. So I showed them 2 or 3 examples of that and talked about how sometimes communities and certain perspectives can be marginalized when their story isn't shared. You see that in media a lot when people's stories aren't told. And the particular population that I work with, there's a lot in that population whose stories aren't typically told in the news or in media or in film or TV. So they really, really related to that, and they really, really got into it. And then I went from that and I dove right into talking about this famous example. I don't know how famous it is for everybody, but like I've seen this a few times. There's this image out there of this guy during wartime who he has one soldier's like pointing kind of a gun at his head, and there's another soldier who's like giving him like a canteen of water to drink. So that's the whole image. But if you only see like the first third of the image, you just see a gun being pointed at the soldiers or the POW, their head. And so it seems really dramatic. It seems scary almost. So I showed that to my 5th graders. I didn't want to show it to my younger kids, but like I showed it to them, and they were like, "Oh, that's kind of an intense scene." And then I showed them the middle part of the scene where they see both parts. They see both the man being drinking and the man also obviously in a scene of war. And then I showed them the third part where on the far right you just see the soldier feeding the man a drink. And so we had a discussion. We had a serious discussion about like, if you just saw the first scene, how would you feel? How would you feel if you only saw the third scene? And so removing, the perspective in deciding like what you show them, what the media shows you really can change your entire or alter your entire perception of what you're actually seeing. And so, I mean, some of these kids were ones that like, they're really hard, like, they're really squirrely. They're hard to sometimes get to be quiet. But like when I was showing them some of this information and showing them these different perspectives using comics, using media coverage, they got really quiet. And they were just like, this is really interesting. And like they all had something to say about it. And it was really kind of a magical moment to kind of be able to talk to them about media and how we see things, and how sometimes we don't see all the perspectives that are shared with us, and to ask those kinds of important questions.
That's really great. And I think that, like, I just think in my head of all the graphic novels that I have in my library and how I could use them in these ways to teach and talk about media literacy. And so I can't wait to hear you present at AASL now, but I'm thinking that you need to write like a book because this is, I mean, it's, and kids, number one, they love graphic novels. They love, and when you show them things that are interesting and grab their attention, like that's what gets their curiosity and their thinking starts. And so what you're doing is so neat, and I love those tie-ins. I think I think about like March, the book March about and some of these like historical ones that tell stories that would be so great to, talk about not only history, but where we are now and just talking about media literacy. Very cool.
So, thank you. So I do try to I do have some challenges that I challenge kids with that I've done at the high school level. And I'll share just a couple of those because I don't want to get into all of them. But I do have kids create their own comics. Like I had the kids create comics for their day at the library to go on their library card. But at the high school level, one thing I did was I was teaching a communication skills class, and so I had them to find a Super Bowl commercial and then to break it down to like the 6 or 7 panels or the 6 or 7 shots that like most sold them on the product, and then to kind of distill it. And then I always tell the kids like it doesn't really matter too much how good your actual drawing is. It's more important that you're thinking about what it is that you're drawing. This is the whole metacognition factor. And so I had several of them take, a Peyton Manning Super Bowl commercial or some other sort of Super Bowl commercial and distill it down to 6 or 7 or 8. And like they would ask me, like, can I do 12 panels or can I do just 4? And I was like, however few or however many it takes for you to be able to distill an entire Super Bowl message down into that I'm okay with that as long as you are following just the basic directions of the assignment. And so I got some really good responses from that. I could tell that they were really thinking about like the concepts because we in that particular unit we were talking about focal points and we were talking about the various different types of propaganda and advertising techniques that advertisers use. So you could do something like that. Or another example is you could have them create a short comic that fills in the gaps of the gutter between 2 panels. Because in a comic book you're reading along and like you just quickly go from one panel to the next. But sometimes the author or the illustrator they decide they're going to leave out some information in that gutter in that area between the panels and TV and news coverage does that too. They have to quickly tell the stories. So they have to figure out like what they're going to leave out. But why do they decide to leave out some parts but not other parts? And so those are great conversations that you can have. And so there's lots of different ways that you can have kids get into the whole art of designing their own comics, and in a way that like also helps them to learn media literacy skills.
It's a great collaboration too. It could be between like your art department and your history and the librarian, like so many different ways that you could use this, which I think is really neat too. I can't wait to see the projects that you do this year, and you have to make sure that you share them because I think that we all have so much to learn from you, and I appreciate what you've shared. And one thing too, as we talk today, I know that you stay busy too as a business owner. And that's something that I really wanted you to have time to talk about what you have been up to and how that overlaps like with the work that you do with libraries and librarians.
Well, thank you, Shannon. So about 40 years or so ago, my dad started a company. And then about 3 years ago, I came on as co-owner with the company. And so AASL was coming up, and um, my sister, who is also co-owner, um, I'm grateful to get to work with family. I know how you know how that is, and so they gave. I mean, AASL was coming up, and so we thought, we should try to maybe have an exhibit or something at AASL. So I wanted to develop some product that was specific to our time period, the era that we're currently living. And so I helped to be part of the design team that designed about 13 different T-shirts some things on like book banning, but on other subjects as well. We have one that's that says "Libraries are for everyone," but it's on a tie-dye shirt. We have one that says freedom on it, but it's like it's a book and it's really red, white, and blue. Another one that just says "I heart my library." There's another one that's I think would be great for Halloween, which is coming up at this point. It says "Head of a Librarian" on it, and it has like just arrows pointing to different parts of a skull that share the different roles that librarians play. Another one that says "Nevertheless, they persisted" as a librarian pushing a book cart, and says hashtag Unite Against Book Bans. So we have like 13 or so shirts that we'll have there. And then we also have eraselets, which are like bracelets that erase, that have different messages on them. And then we have, like those little pop-up things that people will have on their phones, little pop-up pictures. We have those, and just different other things like bookmarks and other stuff, but just all kind of library related items.
Tell us what the name of the business is too.
Oh, I forgot to do that. I'm terrible at plugging things.
Okay.
The business is called NIMCO Incorporated.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to include that too, so our listeners can find that information and they can find all this cool stuff that you and your family, how fun to do this with your family. And I can't wait to pick some up at the conference. That's really awesome.
Thank you.
I love it. Well, let's kind of close this now just by having you tell our listeners where to find you on social media. That's always a great thing to include.
All right. Well, so I am currently on Twitter at Mr. Library. That's MISTER Library. And then I am on Instagram and TikTok and Threads. I think that's all of them, at the Mr. Library. So it's at THEMISTER Library.
Cool.
So, and then NIMCO is at NIMCO Inc.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And I'm going to include all this too in the notes because we want people to know what to do. So that is amazing. This conversation, it just gets me thinking. I have so many things to do, but now I want to go to my destiny and look at the graphic novels and kind of brainstorm. So I love it. It's great. Great stuff, my friend.
Thank you so much, Shannon.
As always, thank you to all of our listeners for joining us for this episode of the Future Ready Librarian podcast series, Leading from the Library. And a very special thank you to our sponsors, Follett. You make a difference in our libraries, schools, and within our lives and that of our students every day. We appreciate everything you do. I hope you can take what you learned in today's podcast and put it to use within your practice as a future-ready librarian. If I can support you in any way, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram at Shannon M. Miller, or to my email at shannonmcclintockmiller@gmail.com. I am always happy to help. Until next time, friends, keep finding ways to lead within and from your library.